Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Doreen Herbert. Doreen Herbert was born on November 29, 1952, in California. She grew up in a very large family of 5 children. Her kindness and desire to help others defined her as a person. After college, she moved to San Francisco, where she worked as a physiotherapist. Doreen also nurtured a dream of creating her own large family. This aspiration became a reality when she met Michael Dennis, who worked near her clinic. They began dating, got married, and in 1976, their son Paul was born. Initially, Michael and Doreen were happy, but the birth of their child marked the beginning of their marital troubles. A year later, they decided to go their separate ways, with their son staying with Doreen and Michael receiving regular visitation rights. Doreen and her family were still able to maintain a fairly stable life despite the many hardships they faced. She met Charles, and they started dating, eventually getting married and settling in a quiet neighborhood in San Jose. They was thrilled when their daughter Diana was born in 1979. Charles was eager to be a father and was delighted to welcome Diana, raising her alongside Doreen's son from a previous relationship. Tragedy struck in February 1980, when disaster befell their young family. 4-year-old Paul slipped through the fence surrounding their backyard pool and fell into the water. Doreen, who was at home at the time, discovered what had happened too late. She immediately pulled Paul from the water and called for emergency services. Paul was rushed to the hospital and connected to life support, but after 10 agonizing days, the medical team concluded that he had no chance of recovery. The heartbreaking decision was made to disconnect Paul from life support. Doreen was heartbroken and consumed by guilt, despite the police investigation clearing her of any blame. However, with the help of her young daughter, she slowly began to heal. For years after the traumatic event, the family finally received some good news. After 2 previous miscarriages, Doreen became pregnant again, and this time, everything seemed to be going smoothly. They was expecting a baby boy, due to arrive in early November. Just days before Doreen's scheduled hospital visit, the family decided to participate in Halloween festivities. On the evening of October 31st, the neighborhood was filled with decorated homes, children trick-or-treating, and parents handing out candy. Diana, now 4 years old, was excited to join in and her parents agreed. Although Doreen was 9 months pregnant, she accompanied her daughter on the trick-or-treating adventure, while Charles stayed home to hand out candy to other children. Charles and his wife, Doreen, had returned home from taking their daughter trick-or-treating. Just before 9 p.m., noticing they were running low on candy, Charles decided to make a quick trip to the nearby store to restock. At around 8:50 p.m., he left the house, leaving his wife and daughter behind. 15 minutes later, he returned home to find the front door slightly ajar, which seemed suspicious. As he entered the house, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife, Doreen, lay on the floor in the corridor, surrounded by a large amount of blood and showed no signs of life. Charles immediately called 911. In the living room, he then found the body of their unborn child. Charles was in shock, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. At first he wondered if Doreen had had a miscarriage, but he quickly realized that something much more serious had happened. Next to their unborn child lay Doreen's severed hand, making it clear to Charles that his family had been attacked. Fearing for his daughter's safety, he frantically searched for her. There was so much blood on the floor that he slipped and fell while running through the house. Eventually, he found his daughter hiding behind the sofa in the living room. She is still alive and unhurt. When paramedics arrived, they found Doreen's weak pulse and rushed her to the hospital. Tragically, Doreen did not survive and was pronounced dead in the ambulance. Her unborn child also did not survive. The attacker had inflicted severe injuries on the baby after removing it from Doreen's womb. A post-mortem examination revealed that Doreen had been stabbed multiple times with a long, sharp object, possibly a sword or machete. The crime scene was particularly disturbing, with blood covering the floors, walls, and ceiling. Police officers at the scene were deeply affected by what they witnessed. Despite a thorough search of the house, no signs of the perpetrator or any evidence were found. However, investigators did discover bloody footprints leading from the house to the middle of the road, suggesting that the killer may have escaped in a vehicle. Soon, investigators found another crucial piece of evidence on the lawn in front of the house, a wolf mask covered in blood. They believed it might belong to the killer, as Charles reported they didn't own such a mask. The evidence was sent to the laboratory for analysis. And police attempted to question Diana, who was the only witness in this incident. Although shaken and in complete shock, Diana provided valuable details about what happened. She explained that shortly after her father left for the store, someone knocked on their door. When Doreen answered, she saw a man wearing a wolf mask and holding a long blade. He threatened to kill her, and Doreen immediately screamed at Diana to run out of the house. Diana hid behind the sofa but couldn't recall what happened next until her father found her. Initially, the police found it suspicious that the victim's husband, Charles, had left for the store just minutes before the killer arrived. This coincidence led investigators to consider him as a potential suspect. When Charles returned home, he unknowingly stepped on blood multiple times, even falling and getting covered in it. Despite this, Diana was unable to help identify the attacker due to the wolf mask. Police initially considered the possibility that Charles might have intentionally gotten blood on his clothes to create an alibi. However, detectives quickly discovered several inconsistencies in this theory. Firstly, Charles's shoes did not match the bloody footprints found on the street. Secondly, the killer likely escaped in a car parked in front of the house, but no blood was found in Charles's vehicle, nor was a different pair of shoes discovered. To investigate further, police went to the store that Charles had visited that evening and spoke to the staff there. They confirmed that Charles had indeed purchased candy from him. This established an alibi for Charles, as he didn't have enough time to commit the murder. Surveillance footage from the store supported Charles's account, leading detectives to temporarily rule him out as the prime suspect. They then asked Charles if he knew of anyone who might want to harm his family. Charles immediately pointed out Michael, Doreen's ex-husband. According to Charles, Michael's behavior changed dramatically after the death of their son, who had drowned in the pool. Michael blamed Doreen for the boy's death, believing she had deliberately killed Paul to cut ties with him. Michael filed a lawsuit against his ex-wife Doreen, holding her responsible for the death of Paul, but lost the case. Their marriage had been troubled even before their divorce. After the birth of their son, Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic, often withdrawing into depression and distancing himself from his family. Doreen suspected that Michael's childhood traumas were to blame. As a child, Michael had hearing problems and wore a bulky hearing aid, which earned him constant teasing from his peers. This led to him growing up as an introvert with few friends and a fear of interacting with women. Although his relationship with Doreen seemed to have helped him overcome these issues, they eventually resurfaced and contributed to their decision to divorce. When Doreen married Charles, Michael began to resent her, particularly for the fact that another man was raising his son. These feelings became even worse after Paul's death, made Michael hate his ex-wife even more. Michael has also been unemployed for a long time, which had a significant impact on him. After considering this information, the detectives decided to visit Michael's house to speak with him. Although Charles's statement alone was not enough to make Michael the main suspect, the fact that Michael lived only 2 miles from Doreen's house prompted the detectives to pay him a visit immediately. The officers arrived at Michael's home around midnight and noticed a pickup truck parked near the garage. When police shined their flashlights on Michael's car, they saw blood on the steering wheel and keys. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. Lights were still on inside the house and they could hear running water, leading them to suspect that Michael might be destroying evidence or washing bloody clothes. They continued knocking until Michael opened the door. Michael remained calm, even after being informed Doreen's murder. Michael answered the officers' questions calmly and allowed them to enter his house without a warrant. He claimed that he had gone to the store earlier that day, returned home, and hadn't left since. He even agreed to sign a form allowing the police to search his home. However, as he reached for the pen to sign, officers noticed a deep cut on his right hand. Michael explained that he had accidentally cut himself while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, but the police were skeptical of his story. The wound was fresh, with blood still seeping out. As officers searched the house, Michael accompanied one of them upstairs to retrieve his ID. However, when Michael reached for the bed headboard, the officer intervened, sensing suspicious behavior. Why would Michael store his documents behind the bed? Curiosity led the police to conduct a deeper investigation. Upon approaching the bed, they spotted a holster attached to the headboard, containing a loaded gun. The officer confiscated the weapon and escorted Michael downstairs to the other officers. Meanwhile, the officers discovered a trail of blood droplets leading from the house to the garage. And they found a washing machine and a pile of clothes with bloodstains. This evidence is enough to arrest Michael. A thorough search of the house by detectives and forensic experts followed, seeking evidence that might link Michael to the murder. Although the blood analysis would take a few days, the police made some disturbing discoveries. They found an empty box for an 18-inch machete. Medical experts confirmed that the wounds from this knife matched the actual wounds found on Doreen's body. During the investigation, police found 2 makeshift coffins in Michael's house, leading them to believe that he was planning to harm his ex-wife, Doreen, and her husband. The presence of medical body bags at his home was also suspicious. As detectives pieced together the evidence, they went to a judge to request a warrant for Michael's arrest. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence, they were initially only able to hold him for a limited time. When the judge refused to issue an arrest warrant, citing insufficient circumstantial evidence to convict Michael, he was released from prison. But detectives eventually got vital information from the autopsy results. Experts discovered that the crime scene had blood from 2 individuals. One blood type was identified as Doreen's, and the other was Michael's. This evidence suggested that Michael had likely injured himself while attacking Doreen. With this new evidence, the judge quickly issued a warrant for Michael's arrest, charged him with the murder of Doreen and her unborn child. In addition, detectives discovered that Michael owned a wolf mask identical to the one found near Doreen's house the previous Halloween. Further inquiry revealed that Michael had worn the mask to a party, and a photograph of him wearing it was even obtained by police. To validate this, detectives searched Michael's home and found the same clothing he wore in the photo. To search for new clues to the case, the police interviewed Doreen's neighbors about the incidents that happened that night. Several children who were trick-or-treating reported seeing a man wearing a wolf mask standing across from Doreen's house, eyeing it intensely. This sighting occurred around 7 p.m., a full 2 hours before the murder. Michael's trial commenced in July 1988, 4 years after the crime. He initially pleaded guilty but later changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. A psychologist evaluated Michael and diagnosed him with severe mental health issues. Michael claimed that the horror of Halloween was too much to bear, as the sight of children trick-or-treating reminded him of his own loss and triggered a mental breakdown. He alleged that this breakdown led him to visit Doreen's house armed with a machete on the evening of the murder. When Doreen opened the door, Michael revealed his true identity as the man behind the mask and made a shocking statement: she killed their son. Recognizing the man as Michael, Doreen quickly screamed for her daughter to run and Michael immediately attacked her. Michael claimed he was unaware that Doreen was pregnant at the time of the attack, but this assertion was met with skepticism. Doreen was visibly pregnant, standing at 4 feet 1 inches tall, and her friends found it hard to believe that Michael wouldn't have noticed, especially given her prominent belly. In fact, her friends joked that her pregnancy had made her almost as wide as she was tall. The prosecution argued that Michael was fully aware of his actions and had planned the crime in advance, a claim supported by evidence from the investigation. Detectives discovered that Michael had previously shared his desire to kill his ex-wife and her husband with friends, and had even discussed disposing of their bodies in the bay. The presence of 2 coffins and body bags in his home suggested that he was serious about carrying out this plan, and the prosecution argued that he had adjusted his intentions for some reason to target Doreen instead. Michael may have panicked or feared being caught, prompting him to leave the house quickly. During the trial, Doreen's 9-year-old daughter, Diana, testified about what she witnessed. Charles had wanted to spare his daughter the traumatic experience, but she was the only witness to the crime. The trial lasted a year, ultimately resulting in Michael's conviction for the murders of Doreen and her unborn child. Michael was sentenced to death, but a moratorium on the death penalty in California delayed his execution. As a result, Michael remains in prison, and his sentence will be no carried out. Years later, Diana revealed that the murder had such a profound effect on her, and she could never forget the horror she witnessed. Ultimately, Diana decides to forgive Michael and try to move past the past to focus on the future. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you. Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shaq, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, it appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stop near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house, but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Buchanan family. Molly met Adam Buchanan, a divorced father of one, when she applied for an office manager position at his company. At the time, Adam was raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. Molly, a cheerful and sociable blonde, immediately caught the attention of the company owner, and the interest was mutual. They started a romance, which turned into a serious relationship, and Molly eventually moved in with Adam. Molly, who dreamed of a loving and friendly family, made an effort to build a strong bond with her stepson Nolan. Soon, she became pregnant, and they had a son named Gavin. Those who knew the Buchanans described them as a close-knit family of four. Adam, who owned a construction company, earned a comfortable living, and the family even purchased a vacation property in El Dorado County, California, a small cabin on 19 acres in Greenwood. The cabin was rustic with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. But Adam, being in the construction business, actively worked on remodeling it, and the family frequently visited the cabin. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township, western El Dorado County, on Highway 193 between Coloma and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found that the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property, and the cabin had burned to the ground, with charred remains in the ashes. The fire department personnel left the scene untouched. At 11 a.m., firefighters alerted the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office to the fire scene, unsure of what they were dealing with. Initially, they suspected a pet might be trapped inside the house. However, upon arriving, the coroner faced a challenging situation. The house was still smoldering, making it impossible to inspect the interior. They had to wait for the flames to die down and the temperature to decrease. Once the coroner could examine the house, they detected the pungent smell of burnt flesh and soon discovered a human skull and charred torso. It became apparent that the tragedy had claimed a life. The officer called for backup, and additional officers from the sheriff's office arrived to conduct a meticulous investigation of the scene. The evidence led to an obvious conclusion: the isolated cabin, located in a remote area, was not the primary residence of its owners, but rather a vacation retreat. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the adjacent property, and running the license plates could identify the owner. It was possible that the owner was the wildfire victim. It was quickly discovered that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by Adam Buchanan. Buchanan, the owner, lived 160 miles away from the accident scene, a 3-hour drive from Bonita, California. This information supported the police's initial assumption that the house served as a country retreat for city dwellers who vacation there to escape the hustle and bustle. It remained unclear who was inside, the company's owner, Mr. Buchanan, or someone else. The detectives began their investigation with the owner's name as their first clue. The Bonita police officer's task was to verify that all of Buchanan's family members were safe and at home. At the correct address, the officers arrived at the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. When they knocked on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage answered, looking surprised, and asked what had brought them to his doorstep. To avoid alarming the household, the officers decided to first establish who was present in the house. They didn't want to assume that the company car's disappearance was necessarily linked to the owner himself. It could have been taken by someone else from the company. Nolan Buchanan informed the officers that his father, Adam, had left for the weekend to his country estate, 160 miles away, with his partner Molly and their 8-year-old son Gavin, and they were expected to return in the evening. According to Nolan, his father had entrusted him with taking care of the house. Although the remains found in the cabin were not yet confirmed to be those of the Buchanans, the information gathered and the discovery of 2 sets of remains by the evening of September 13th were enough to declare the family missing. The El Dorado County Police visited Nolan's home on September 14th to question him further and determine who had perished in the fire. However, they were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan, who explained that their son, the cabin's owner, regularly visited the property to perform his own repairs. The parents were extremely worried, having been unable to contact their son or daughter-in-law until then. The officers learned that the house relied on generators for power, but it had no electricity at the time of the incident. The presence of gas cylinders inside the cabin led to 2 possible theories. The fire could have been either an accident or intentional. By Sept 15th, investigators collected evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit, which changed the case's direction. A skull with a bullet hole was found, revealing a homicide, not an accidental fire. Forensic DNA testing showed the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull belonged to a child, making murder the primary focus. The fire was intentionally set to destroy evidence. Next, investigators sought to determine the circumstances: burglary gone wrong, family suicide, or a grudge against Adam Buchanan of Buchanan Construction. Investigators pursued the theory that Molly's murder was a crime of passion, examining her life for enemies and her marriage for clues. As leads dried up, they focused on the troubled relationship, marked by abuse, sleeping apart, and intense arguments. Molly's mother feared they'd kill each other, yet Molly stuck with Adam, briefly fleeing with their son. The couple enjoyed hunting near home, where guns were common. Police suspected another fight escalated. One spouse shot the other, then took their own life. However, an inconsistency emerged. If the tragedy was caused by a conflict between the husband and wife, logic dictates that the instrument of the crime would be found near the remains of one of them. But this was not the case. Investigators theorized that the weapon might have been damaged in the fire, making it less conspicuous than expected. Over 5 days, forensic team members meticulously sifted through the ashes in the home, conducting a meticulous search. Despite their thoroughness, they did not find the expected result. No weapons were discovered in the house. By this time, the forensic examination results were in. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies matched Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds prior to the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the possibility of suicide. The lack of firearms suggested that a 4th person, unknown until then, was present in the house, shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start anew. Police had no option but to turn to 16-year-old Nolan, the son of the deceased. Nolan informed the officers that his family had driven away in an old Dodge truck. According to Nolan, his father chose to use the company vehicle instead of his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because the truck and trailer were already loaded with rocks to decorate the area around his country cabin. This was the truck that police found near the burned structure. When questioned about why he didn't accompany his relatives on vacation, Nolan reiterated that he had to stay behind to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. Nolan also mentioned that there was a neighbor growing illegal marijuana on the edge of the Buchanan property, which had led to frequent arguments between his father and the neighbor, with his father demanding that the neighbor stop planting it and threatening to report the issue to the police. When discussing the family business, Nolan revealed the company's financial struggles, including downsizing and a significant reduction in employees from what his father had mentioned. The business debts were accumulating rapidly. The investigation now had valuable information and a suspect, specifically a neighbor, given the common link between violent crime and illegal drug cultivation in that area. The detectives believed the threat of reporting to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. However, the issue was that they didn't know which neighbor they should focus on. After the family's murder, the financial crisis engulfing their business had to be addressed. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and questioned the employees. As Nolan had warned, the company was in dire straits, teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, with debts exceeding $30,000. As a result, some employees lost their jobs. Interestingly, some of the fired employees were bitterly unhappy with their dismissal and could potentially be suspects in the crime. During a community cleanup, students found a purse with Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan's IDs and a .22 caliber rifle hidden nearby. This led detectives to a new theory. The killer used the rifle and took their documents to cover tracks. The discovery was crucial because it suggested that the killer had gone to great lengths to reach Greenwood, murder the family, and then return to Bonita to get rid of the evidence. This suggested that the killer was likely a local resident of Bonita. The fact that the evidence was found near the location of Buchanan construction reinforced the theory that the boss was killed by a disgruntled employee. Detectives sent the gun and the bag of documents to be examined and requested a warrant to search the company's records and premises. Here, during the search, they discovered a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises, which was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. Since it was known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, the investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a white Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had initially told them. This discovery revealed that Adam had deliberately misled the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators decided to re-interview Nolan, aiming to keep him safe while gathering as much information as possible. This time, they asked him specific questions, such as what movie he had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. Unaware of the implications, Nolan mentioned that he had used his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search the Buchanan home in Bonita, search their vehicles, and examine their financial records. The Ford automobile sat in the driveway, its wheels caked with reddish soil, similar to that found in Greenwood. This suggested that the car had recently been driven on the dirt roads of Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip earlier, some soil might have remained on the wheels, but it wouldn't have been as noticeable. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed any wheel tread marks near the country house, but the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Further investigation revealed that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at a Taco Bell fast food chain on his way to Greenwood. However, Nolan claimed he stayed home and didn't accompany his parents, and that he had the credit card in his possession. Detectives reviewed the security cameras at the diner and saw what they expected: a white Ford, not a truck. When they searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that listed 4 drinks, not 3. Similarly, evidence collected at the scene of the fire pointed to 4 drink cups, indicating that Nolan had been in the car. On Saturday, September 12th, Adam and Molly used a credit card at the Valencia Club Bar in Penn, about 30 minutes from the cabin. This was a familiar spot for the couple, as they would often stop by after working on the cabin. Security cameras at the bar recorded the time they left, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track their route back to the cabin. The cameras showed that a Ford F-150, driven by Adam and Molly, headed towards the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire. Then at 3:30 a.m., the same vehicle was spotted driving in the opposite direction, but this time with only Nolan inside. Later that morning, on Sunday, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to make purchases at 3 different businesses in Bonita: Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed that Adam only had 1 credit card, which contradict Nolan's previous statements. By the time the forensic results were back, Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun, leading to his arrest in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan maintained he was not guilty of the charges against him, and instead, he spun a tale claiming his father had shot the family, then pointed a rifle at him. Nolan said he took the weapon away in self-defense, accidentally shooting his father in the process. Nolan attributed his subsequent actions, including setting the house on fire, to a state of panic and extreme fear. Throughout the trial, the defense emphasized Adam's history of abuse towards Nolan and other family members. However, the medical examiner questioned the verdict due to the inconsistent angle of the bullet wound on Gavin's skull, suggesting it was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan countered that he and his brother's beds were adjacent, and they were both awakened by the noise and screaming. He claimed to have seen someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin, then pointed the rifle at him. According to Nolan, he pushed the attacker away, which would have resulted in a shot fired at around a 45 degrees angle, contradicting the forensic evidence. The prosecution's theory is that Nolan killed his brother when they were alone in the house, while their parents were out at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot and killed them as well, as evidenced by the position of the bodies. The sequence of events suggests that Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Next, Nolan took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. He then went home, met up with his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, thereby establishing an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury delivered a guilty verdict on 3 counts of first-degree murder against Nolan. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In announcing the sentence, Judge Kingsbury acknowledged the verbal and physical abuse Nolan had suffered, as well as the testimony that he killed his brother to spare him from further suffering at their father's hands. However, she also highlighted the premeditation of the crime, the subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and Nolan's plans to take over the family business, which he had shared with relatives. The judge referenced Nolan's failure to comply with rules and erratic behavior, as reported by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center. where he was sent following his arrest. The judge informed Nolan that he, like anyone, has the opportunity to reform, and that if he exhibits good behavior, he may be eligible for parole in 25 years. Despite this, Nolan maintains his innocence, and if he is eventually granted parole, he will be required to pay a substantial amount of compensation to the victims, the exact sum of which has not yet been determined. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Mackenzie Sherilla. Mackenzie Sherilla was born in August 2004 in Strongsville, Ohio, the third of 3 children. Her parents, John Schilla and Natalie Stevens, made a conscious effort to raise their children with love, care, and a good education, always encouraging their endeavors. As the youngest daughter, Mackenzie was often spoiled and got away with many mischievous acts, including serious offenses, due to her parents' leniency. As she grew up, Mackenzie became a demanding and selfish individual. She was accustomed to getting her way and believed she was above consequences, no matter her actions. Classmates and teachers observed that Mackenzie was a pleasant and open child in her early years, but as she aged, her behavior and character began to deteriorate. She would throw tantrums when things didn't go her way, lost her temper easily, was impudent and impatient, used foul language, and was even known to get into physical altercations. Mackenzie refused to consider anyone else's opinions, always believing her own view to be the only one that mattered, and prioritized her own interests above all else. In her teenage years, Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly unbearable, but her parents turned a blind eye, attributing it to adolescence and believing that she needed understanding and patience. However, her defiant nature was only the tip of the iceberg. She developed a drinking problem in high school and occasionally dabbled in illegal substances, often getting away with it. Her reckless actions posed a direct threat not only to herself, but also to those around her. Despite this, her parents either failed to notice or chose to ignore the obvious issue. Like many of her peers, Mackenzie was obsessed with social media, rarely putting her phone down. She frequently posted provocative photos of herself smoking or drinking on her account, accompanied by equally provocative comments. Her friends were similar, and together they engaged in vandalism, organized fights, and occasionally stole from others, even catching the attention of the police on several occasions. However, they were merely given warnings and educational talks, which reinforced their belief that they were above the law. Dominic Russo, born in September 2001, was the 4th of 7 children to Frank and Christine Russo in Strongsville. Growing up in a close-knit family with 3 brothers and 3 sisters, Dominic received ample love, attention, and care despite being part of a large family. He excelled academically, actively participated in sports from a young age, and maintained a healthy lifestyle. His parents, Frank and Christine, struck a balance between being moderately strict and encouraging their children's overall development. As a result, Dominic was popular among his peers, often drew attention, and was known for his bright and attractive appearance. Focusing on meaningful connections, Dominic avoided casual relationships. After high school, he enrolled in a local university to pursue a degree in performing arts production, aiming to make a name for himself in the music industry. Dominic was a talented young man who wrote and performed his own songs. By the age of 20, Dominic had achieved significant milestones, establishing his own small business, buying a car, and renting a spacious apartment in a desirable neighborhood. He continued to excel in sports and was regarded as one of the top students at the university. Dominic and Mackenzie first met at a party surrounded by mutual friends when she was in her graduating class. This chance encounter proved to be a pivotal moment in their lives. As total opposites, they were instinctively attracted to each other. Dominic, a handsome young man with curly hair and a passion for music, immediately caught Mackenzie's attention. Unlike the guys she usually hung out with, he was educated, well-mannered, and interesting, able to converse on various topics. Mackenzie, a stunning woman with a slim figure and impeccable style, knew how to make a lasting impression. She turned on her charm to grab Dominic's attention, which she quickly achieved. The two started dating in the fall of 2021 and soon introduced each other to their parents. While Mackenzie's parents were thrilled with her choice and thought Dominic was perfect for their daughter, Dominic's parents, Frank and Christine Russo, had mixed feelings about Mackenzie. On the surface, she appeared sweet and innocent, trying to impress them, but something about her raised their suspicions. Mackenzie's friends and family believed she had genuinely fallen in love for the first time and hoped her relationship with Dominic would positively impact her character and behavior. At the time, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome of this romance. They quickly became inseparable, regularly holding hands and openly showing their affection in public. As a result, it didn't take long for the news of their relationship to spread throughout the small town. While those closest to Mackenzie felt sympathy for her boyfriend, most people were genuinely happy for they. However, Dominic soon realized that something was off. He began to notice strange behaviors in Mackenzie, such as her frequent outbursts of defiance and her insistence on getting her way in all interactions. At first, he didn't give it much thought, attributing it to her young age and desire for attention. They started making plans for their future together, including discussing marriage once Mackenzie turned 18. They also planned to leave their hometown and move to a major city, ideally New York, where Dominic could pursue a successful music career. As time went on, Mackenzie's behavior grew more and more unsettling, sometimes even scaring Dominic. She demanded that her boyfriend give in to her every demand, and when he refused, she would throw tantrums, acting like a spoiled kid. At first, Dominic tried to brush off her outbursts as a joke, but soon realized that this was the real personality of the woman he was dating. While she was able to keep up a good front in public, when they were alone, she would let loose a flood of emotions and even get physically violent. Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading the young man to decide he'd had enough. He suggested they take a break to allow her to sort out her feelings, but this triggered a public outburst in front of their mutual friends. Mackenzie screamed, threatened to kill him if he left, and vowed to burn down his house and wreck his car. However, this dramatic display only reinforced his conviction that ending their toxic relationship was the right decision. Despite this, Mackenzie was determined to hold on to her boyfriend. She continued to call him, inviting him to parties and posting photos of them on social media with declarations of love. When Dominic made it clear that everything was over, she flew into a rage. Mackenzie began showing up at his house almost daily, yelling insults and threats under his windows. She called him from different numbers, left messages on his answering machine, and sent emails and social media posts. One moment, she'd swear her love and offer to start anew. The next, she'd descend into insults and threats once again. Dominic was utterly bewildered by Mackenzie's behavior, which he had never experienced before. He attempted to engage in conversation with her, ignoring her, and even recording her aggressive outbursts on his phone. However, Mackenzie's conduct escalated to the point where she would publicly confront Dominic, screaming and insulting him in front of bystanders. This turned his life into a living hell, but he still held on to the hope that with time, she would lose interest and move on to someone else. One day, in the presence of witnesses, Mackenzie brazenly declared that killing Dominic would be easier than letting him go. She threatened that if he didn't return to her, no one else would have him, and she would take care of it. Although Dominic didn't take her threats seriously, those around him recognized that Mackenzie was dead serious. The schoolgirl frequently issuing menace included promises to physically assault him, run him over with a car, kidnap him and drive off a cliff, or stop the car on train tracks in front of an oncoming train. Each sinister scenario was described in vivid detail, as if Mackenzie had meticulously planned it and was waiting for the perfect moment to execute it. Mackenzie realized that threatening and insulting Dominic wasn't getting him back, but rather pushing him away. So she changed her approach. She became sweet and charming once more, stopped pressuring and harassing him, and pretended to have learned from her mistakes, wanting to improve herself for the better. She brought up the upcoming university enrollment, asking for his help in choosing a university, and even claimed to be worried about her final exams. Dominic was pleasantly surprised by these changes and, despite everything, still had feelings for his former girlfriend. He decided to help her with enrollment, simply out of kindness. As a result, they started seeing each other and communicating again. They grew closer over time. Dominic began inviting Mackenzie on dates and sought to spend all his free time with her, believing she had changed, matured, and become more responsible. Without realizing it, he fell in love with her again, and all past grievances were forgotten. This time, however, they didn't rush to announce their reunion to friends and acquaintances. Their meetings were more like secret dates, where they simply enjoyed each other's company, avoiding the scrutiny of others. When Dominic's brother Angelo found out what was going on, he warned that their relationship would not end well. But Dominic, being deeply in love, ignored his brother's caution. Meanwhile, Mackenzie, who was obsessed with Dominic, devised a terrifying plan to take revenge on him. She began to fantasize about a high-speed car crash and spent hours driving around the city to find the perfect spot to put her plan into action. Since there were no steep cliffs nearby, she considered targeting a train on the tracks, but eventually decided it was too unreliable. One day, Mackenzie drove into a secluded industrial area with no cameras and very few cars. There, she spotted a massive brick wall, which sparked a new, equally horrific plan in her mind. She decided that if she drove at maximum speed and crashed into the wall, it would be just as sensational as plunging off a cliff. Initially, Mackenzie intended to die alongside Dominic, hoping their tragic story would be told and retold by everyone in the city. She even confided in her best friend, but her friend didn't take her seriously, thinking it was just another empty threat. Mackenzie had made similar claims before, but never followed through. In late July 2022, Mackenzie suggested to her boyfriend Dominic that they attend an upcoming party hosted by their mutual friends, just a week shy of her 18th birthday. The party would be a perfect opportunity for them to have fun, unwind, and publicly showcase their rekindled romance. Dominic agreed, still trusting Mackenzie's sincerity and intentions. The party took place on Saturday, July 30th. Mackenzie and Dominic arrived hand in hand, immediately drawing attention from the other guests. They looked happy, smiled, and openly displayed their affection for each other. Their friends were genuinely delighted with their reunion, noting that they made a lovely and harmonious couple. Throughout the evening and night, the young pair had a blast, happily took photos, and unhesitatingly kissed in front of everyone. Little did anyone know, this joyful celebration would soon turn into a devastating tragedy. Like the other partygoers, they had a few drinks, but Mackenzie secretly took an illegal drug to boost her courage and avoid getting cold feet. The next morning, Mackenzie and Dominic bid farewell to their friends and headed to their car, but Dominic's friend Dave requested a ride home. Mackenzie initially objected, citing their own plans, but Dominic saw no issue with giving his friend a lift, not wanting to arouse suspicion or alter their plans. Mackenzie reluctantly agreed, despite her reservations about the change in plans. Mackenzie got behind the wheel, her boyfriend sat in the passenger seat, and her friend sat behind him. With a slow and quiet start, the car pulled away from the party venue and headed onto Main Street. Mackenzie drove cautiously, keeping to the speed limit and avoiding drawing attention to herself. At a stoplight, she came to a halt, even though the road was empty. As her passengers dozed off, Mackenzie reconsidered her plan. She would later claim that she wanted to die in the accident, but this seems unlikely since she had fastened her seatbelt during the last stop, while her passengers remained unbuckled. When the light turned green, she accelerated quickly, taking a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road that led into an industrial area. The guys were caught off guard, seemingly unaware of what was happening. The car sped up to its top speed, but Mackenzie continued to floor it, steering the vehicle straight into a blank brick wall. The crash occurred in the deserted industrial area early Sunday morning, with no witnesses or Good Samaritans to help. However, a woman living on the outskirts, near the accident site, heard the impact and went outside to investigate. She saw smoke and, upon closer inspection, realized that a car had crashed. After the accident, she rushed back inside to call emergency services. About half an hour later, medics arrived at the scene, but unfortunately, the two men in the car had died instantly. The girl driving the car, however, was still alive, thanks to her seatbelt and airbags. Mackenzie was unconscious, with her legs trapped in the wreckage, but she was breathing and had a palpable pulse, giving hope that she would survive. During the rescue process, she occasionally opened her eyes, but seemed unaware of her surroundings. Mackenzie was rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with multiple fractures and internal organ damage. Blood tests revealed that she had been under the influence of both alcohol and drugs at the time of the accident. Ironically, the doctor believed that this may have helped prevent her from dying from shock while waiting for help to arrive. The police investigation initially suggested that Mackenzie, while under the influence, might not have realized what she was doing, and perhaps tried to drive through the wall or didn't see any obstacles. This theory was supported by the lack of braking distance. However, Mackenzie was unable to provide further insight as she was unconscious in the intensive care unit following a complex operation. Mackenzie regained consciousness and, overcome with emotion, confessed to the doctor on duty. She explained that she had intentionally driven into the wall at high speed, intending to kill her boyfriend and die with him. She clarified that Davin was an unintended victim, only in the car because of his own obsession, having asked to accompany them. Investigations revealed a different story. Surveillance footage tracked the initial part of the car's route, showing Mackenzie driving cautiously and following traffic rules, until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial area. Moreover, evidence emerged that Mackenzie had driven the entire route in both directions several days prior, with her car spotted by at least a dozen witnesses at various times. After leaving the hospital, Mackenzie bounced back quickly and resumed her carefree life. She socialized with friends, made future plans, and even attended a concert in a wheelchair, posting selfies on social media. By Halloween, she was back on her feet and dressed in costume, living life to the fullest. Mackenzie was arrested on November 4th, 2022. The investigation took just over 3 months to gather evidence and build a case against her. She was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession of a controlled substance, which was found in her pocket and detected in her blood. During the trial, Mackenzie changed her story multiple times. Initially, she claimed to have suffered a memory lapse, but after a friend testified against her, revealing her plan, Mackenzie shifted her defense, stating she wanted to die with her lover. However, this new claim was quickly disputed, as evidence showed she had worn a seatbelt. On August 21, 2023, the jury found Mackenzie guilty on all charges. Although she was convicted, the court took into account that she was not yet 18 years old at the time of the crime, only 5 days shy of her 18th birthday. As a minor under state law, she was eligible for a more lenient sentence. Mackenzie faced 2 consecutive 15-year sentences without parole for each murder. However, due to her youth, her sentences were allowed to run concurrently, making her eligible for parole in 15 years. At the time of her potential release, Mackenzie will be 33 years old. The court's decision left both sides dissatisfied. The families of the deceased youths announced their intention to appeal for a harsher punishment, while Mackenzie's lawyer felt the sentence was too severe and also appealed. Despite this, the judge refused to modify the sentence, stating that he doubted Cheryl would be released from prison after 15 years. In his view, the defendant had failed to show remorse for her crime, displaying arrogance and even contempt towards the court, and now had ample time to reflect on her heinous act. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Channing Christian. Hugh Christopher Newson Jr., commonly known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee to Mary and Hugh Newson, who raised him in a loving and large family. As the youngest child, he was deeply adored by his family members. During his youth, Chris showcased exceptional athletic abilities, particularly excelling in baseball throughout his school years. His coach firmly believed that he had a promising future in the sport, but a severe injury and the subsequent prolonged recovery process, unfortunately, ended his athletic career. Despite this setback, Chris possessed a multitude of talents. He was an skilled artist, a proficient guitar player, had impressive woodworking skills, and possessed in-depth knowledge about cars and motorcycles, having dreamed of becoming a mechanic during his youth. Following high school, Chris's passion for carpentry took center stage, leading him to attend the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he proved to be a diligent student, consistently ranking among the top of his class. Channing Christian was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas, to Dina and Gary Christian, the younger of their two children. She grew up with her older brother Chase, with whom she had a close and loving relationship. What made their birth even more special was that their mother, Dina, had been diagnosed with infertility in her younger years, making the arrival of her two children a remarkable blessing. In 1997, the Christian family relocated to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools and their parents started a thriving family business. Dina worked from home, conducting individual psychotherapy sessions, while Channing, who shared her mother's passion for psychology, was an outgoing and kind-hearted individual. After high school, Channing went on to study sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save up for her dream car. On her 21st birthday, her parents and brother helped make her dream a reality by contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. In the same month, Channing and Christopher were invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. Channing visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration and parked her car in a nearby underground garage where they had planned to meet. However, Christopher was delayed, leading to a brief argument between them as they were running late for the event. As they failed to show up at the party, their friends became increasingly worried, knowing that it was unlike them to miss an event without notification. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. Channing's friend called her mom repeatedly, getting no response. The next morning, Dina noticed Channing hadn't come home. At first, she thought Channing might have stayed at Chris's after the party or gone to work from there. But when she saw missed calls from an unknown number, her concern grew. The caller said Channing and Chris never showed up to the party and weren't answering their phones. Dina feared the worst, and Chris's parents were equally worried, thinking he was at Channing's. Channing's parents grew anxious when they found out she, like Chris, had missed work. They contacted police, but the officer was unhelpful, suggesting the couple just wanted alone time. The parents took matters into their own hands, launching a search effort with friends, contacting acquaintances, visiting hospitals, and spreading the word on social media. Despite their efforts, no useful leads emerged. Channing was last seen at a beauty salon on Saturday, chatting about an upcoming party. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police officially launched their investigation into the disappearance of Channing Christian and Christopher Newson. By then, thanks to the tireless efforts of their parents and friends, the entire city was aware of the missing couple. The previous day, rumors had begun circulating about a disturbing discovery near the railroad tracks, although no concrete details were available. A railroad worker, while inspecting the tracks in his designated area, discovered badly damaged human remains on the embankment beside the tracks. The body was in a gruesome state, with multiple injuries, and had been drenched in a flammable liquid in an attempt to set it on fire. Upon responding to the scene, the police cordoned off the area and conducted a meticulous examination, but were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to establish the cause of death and attempt to identify the victim, although it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this challenging. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal and prolonged death. The victim had sustained multiple injuries while still alive, indicating a severe and lengthy assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows, and he had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and a final fatal shot to the head. Furthermore, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police reviewed recent reports of missing young men, they found that Christopher Newson matched the description in terms of age, height, and build. The officers then contacted his parents and asked for DNA samples to confirm the identity, while strongly advising them against viewing the body at the morgue due to its badly burned and unrecognizable state. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis subsequently confirmed that the body was indeed that of the missing student, Christopher Newson. The search for Channon continued, despite the distressing news about Christopher. Channon Christian's parents were still holding on to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held captive somewhere. The last known location of her mobile phone was in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods on the day the couple disappeared, which suggested that they might have been taken there against their will. This led the parents to believe that Channon might still be being held in that area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Channon's Toyota 4Runner was discovered abandoned and in a terrible state. The SUV was dirty, scratched, and had broken headlights and deflated tires. Additionally, all of Channon's personal belongings were missing, and the car was littered with cigarette butts. The seats were torn and stained, and the driver's seat was pushed far back, indicating that a large adult male had last driven the vehicle. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, which stood out in that area. The fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamas Davidson, a man with prior convictions for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, had no witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offered to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Channon alive inside. Inside the house, the police found Channon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, Christopher's headphones and baseball cap, and a knife with blood traces. They also discovered torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing and, tragically, Channon's lifeless body hidden in the house's trash chute system, wrapped in 5 trash bags and bound in the fetal position under dirty sheets. Experts later determined that she likely died in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. The discovery of Channon Christian's body revealed a terrifying sequence of events. Had the police begun their search immediately, they might have saved her from unimaginable suffering. Instead, her body was found with every inch covered in bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous injuries to her genital area, mouth and throat indicated that she had been subjected to multiple brutal assaults by several men. Channon suffered a severe head injury, internal bleeding in her abdominal area, likely caused by kicks. Multiple stab wounds, though not fatal, were inflicted upon her. Her attackers also extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin in an attempt to destroy DNA evidence. They doused her with household bleach, focusing on bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was then forced to ingest bleach. 5 individuals were involved in the brutal crimes against Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Lamarcus Davidson, the owner of the house where Channon's mutilated body and Chris's personal belongings were found, was identified as a fugitive. The police also tracked down Eric Boyd, whose DNA was found at the crime scene. Boyd was arrested on January 11th without resisting and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, stating he wouldn't take the fall for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. As a result, Davidson was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing Chris's sneakers. During the investigation, Davidson downplayed his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house to buy illegal substances, but got caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred while he was away. Further investigation led to the identification of 3 more individuals involved in the case: Davidson's friend George Thomas, his half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, and Vanessa Lynn Coleman, an 18-year-old woman. Once all 5 suspects were arrested, they were put in separate cells and questioned one by one. Each of them tried to shift the blame onto the others, unknowingly providing details of the brutal crime. The pieces of their stories helped to reconstruct the sequence of events and the role each played in the brutal act. Lamarcus Davidson, recently released from prison on parole, was in dire need of money. To support his illegal business of selling banned substances, he urgently needed a vehicle to deliver his goods to customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot notorious for its lack of surveillance cameras, accompanied by his accomplices. Tragically, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot at the same time, arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, fearing witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. They was taken to Davidson's house, where they were subjected to brutal beating and repeated assault. After midnight, Christopher, barefoot and undressed, was forced back into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. The final shot to the head ended his suffering. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in an attempt to destroy any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. After dealing with Christopher, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. The next day, she endured horrific cruelty, leaving her with no uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her, still alive, into plastic trash bags, where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment Vanessa Coleman joined the group is unknown. In her interrogations, Coleman claimed she was a hostage who participated in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd said Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly took part in the events, even taking Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Moreover, a diary found at Coleman's home described the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she called an exciting adventure. During the trials, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, led the criminal group and instigated the brutal acts against the victims. Although Davidson tried to shift the blame, claiming the couple had come to buy drugs and engaged in consensual rough sex that got out of control, the evidence proved otherwise. Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and cruel and premeditated murder. The jury unanimously sentenced him to death for his heinous crimes. Latalvis Cobbins, born 1982, was initially faced with the death penalty for his role in the brutal torture, assaults, and murder. However, he was ultimately handed a life imprisonment sentence without parole. George Thomas, born 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same heinous crimes, with no possibility of release. Eric Boyd, who cooperated with the investigation and aided in the capture of Davidson, received an 18-year prison sentence. The investigation discovered Vanessa Coleman's, born 1988, involvement in the torture, assaults, and tragic murder of Shannon. She was subsequently sentenced to 53 years imprisonment. In 2011, while the convicted felons served their sentences and Davidson awaited execution, the case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, citing substance dependency issues, which called into question his ability to conduct the trial fairly. As a result, all verdicts from the previous 2 years were annulled, and new hearings were scheduled for the 5 individuals responsible for the tragic murder of the students. After retrials, Davidson's death sentence was upheld. Cobbins and Thomas both remained incarcerated, each serving a life sentence without parole. However, Thomas's sentence was later modified to include the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's original 53-year sentence was reduced to 35 years. Although her 2014 appeal was rejected and parole was denied in 2017, she will remain incarcerated until at least April 2032, as determined by the parole board in 2020. Eric Boyd's circumstances drastically changed. Initially, he got a short sentence for cooperating, but was later retried and received life without parole for his role in the assaults and deaths of 2 victims. His accomplice Thomas testified against him, revealing new details, and got a 15% sentence reduction. Boyd's appeals failed, and he's now serving life at Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson awaits execution in Riverbend Max Security. The trial sparked media frenzy, leading to 2 new laws. One protects victims from defamation by the accused, who try to shift blame. The other eliminates the need for a judge's signature on a unanimous verdict, preventing retrials and sentence reviews. The house where Channing Christian and Christopher Newsom were brutally tortured was demolished in 2008. A memorial was built on the site in their memory. A charity foundation and golf tournament were established in Christian's name to support violence victims. A foundation in Newsom's name hosts annual baseball tournaments and awards a scholarship in his memory. Initial media reports of the case were inaccurate, sparking public outcry. Some believed racial bias played a role, given the victims were white and perpetrators African American. However, experts and the police chief found no evidence to support this claim, nor that the case would have received more attention if the races were reversed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jasmine Richardson. In town, the Richardson family was renowned for being exemplary. Deborah and Mark, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, resided in a beautiful and cozy home. Like all Canadians, they were extremely hospitable and sociable. Their home frequently hosted guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. However, everything took a turn for the worse when their eldest daughter, Jasmine, entered puberty. The once calm girl underwent a drastic transformation. Firstly, her character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to arise, and her academic performance started to decline. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing drastically changed. She shifted from enjoying modern pop to heavy rock. Bright colors and clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative as she sought to appeal to boys, drawing attention to her curves. As a result, her interaction with former friends significantly decreased, and she began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed, indicating a shift towards isolation. With the advent of the internet at home, she developed a fascination with Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even went so far as to identify as a witch, embracing the Wiccan religion. To explore these interests, she frequented various websites where she found a community of like-minded individuals who shared her passions. Her social media profile greeted visitors with the phrase, "Welcome to my tragic world." At first glance, it seemed like a typical teenage angst, marked by an excessive flair for drama and mysticism. However, she became increasingly withdrawn from her family. On her profile, she had listed a false name and claimed to be 15, as she preferred interacting with older individuals. Her parents attempted to be supportive during this challenging period, suggesting they spend quality time together and find common interests. However, she found these suggestions dull. Jasmine considered her younger brother a nuisance and gradually stopped communicating with him. Yet she could spend hours on end at the computer, conversing with strangers. Deborah and Mark recognized that their daughter's current state was a phase. She would mature and gain wisdom. As a result, they were quite permissive of her new interests. One day, Jasmine informed them that she wanted to attend a punk rock band concert. Her parents agreed, unaware of the consequences this outing would have. In early 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a local youth band concert, following her own pursuits. She knew Jeremy Steinke, he who had been captivating her heart for months, would be there, as he was also drawn to Gothic culture. They had met on a vampire enthusiast's website where they occasionally exchanged messages. Jeremy presented himself as a 30-year-old werewolf craving blood, and to prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was human or animal in origin. Nonetheless, he clearly considered himself extraordinary, which Jasmine found extremely appealing. After meeting at a concert, the young people's affection for each other continued to grow. Eventually, Stinka worked up the courage to ask her out, and to his delight, she happily agreed. Everything seemed perfect, but there was a major obstacle. Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple was well aware that her parents would not approve of their relationship due to their significant age difference, so they decided to keep it a secret. Furthermore, Jeremy's troubled past would only make matters worse in her parents' eyes. Jeremy grew up in poverty, living with his mother and sister in a trailer. He had a troubled relationship with his mother, who drank excessively and had a string of volatile partners. These partners would often beat him when they were drunk. As a result, by the time he was 13, Jeremy was struggling in school and had developed a fragile mental state. Feeling overwhelmed, Jeremy once attempted to take his own life by hanging himself. Fortunately, he was stopped in time. Afterwards, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. At school, he was bullied, and eventually, he stopped attending classes altogether. As he got older, Jeremy became fascinated with the idea of being immortal and started visiting websites that focused on dark themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, and bloody violence. Few people knew about Jeremy's secret relationship, except for his close friends, who found it unusual and disturbing. The couple managed to keep their communication private until the Richardsons started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark were alarmed when they discovered their daughter Jasmine had been chatting with strangers online, which is a concern for any parent. They immediately took away her computer to protect her. What they found out next was even more disturbing. Jasmine had become infatuated with an adult man who seemed to have questionable motives, known by the ominous nickname Soul Eater. This made her relationship with Jeremy officially off limits. Deborah and Mark sought the help of a psychologist to free their daughter from this harmful relationship. They believed that therapy would also improve their relationship with Jasmine. Fortunately, it worked, and Jasmine appeared to be getting back to a normal life, assuring them that the ordeal was behind her. As a sign of trust, they gave her computer back. Unfortunately, this decision would ultimately seal their fate. Saturday, April 22, 2006, Mrs. Richardson was preparing for bed when she heard a noise in the basement. At first, she thought it was just rats, but as she went downstairs and turned on the light, she saw a person wearing a ski mask standing opposite her, staring at her. Startled, Mrs. Richardson let out a loud scream. The stranger rushed towards her, trying to cover her mouth, but she struggled and screamed even louder. Frustrated, he stepped back, pulled out a knife, and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed downstairs, grabbing a screwdriver he had left on the floor earlier that day while fixing an outlet. When he entered the basement, he was met with a horrific scene. His wife lying in a pool of blood, with the attacker standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder, but was stabbed in the stomach. As the pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mark quietly asked why. The attacker replied that it was because his daughter had wished it. Meanwhile, upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. He sat frozen on his bed in his pajamas, too scared to move. He heard the footsteps getting closer and closer until the bedroom door creaked open. Jasmine was thrilled that her parents believed she was remorseful, which allowed them to communicate again. She emailed Jeremy as soon as she got internet, telling him that it started with her parents gone and ended with them together. During therapy, a dark plan formed and solidified over time. Stinka found it tempting but insisted on creativity and attention to detail. The couple knew they couldn't be together while the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends remembered how frequently she talked about her parents, specifically how much she was annoyed by them. As a result, they believed she wanted to kill them. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. On Saturday, April 22, 2006, Garrett went to his friend Tyler's house across the street. He wanted to play, and the weather was nice despite being quite chilly, as it was still spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed, and no one answered his knock on the door. This was unusual, as the Richardsons' car was parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the curious child peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the house, where he often played with Tyler in the basement. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange and disturbing on the floor, what appeared to be two people lying in a pool of blood. He informed his mother, who was initially skeptical. However, she decided to investigate the family across the street. Together, they approached the house, and Garrett pointed out the window he had looked through earlier. The woman was horrified by what she saw and immediately called emergency services, reporting that something was amiss at the Richardsons, as they appeared to be lying on the basement floor, covered in blood. The police responded quickly, breaking down the front door and descending to the basement, where Garrett and his mother had witnessed the scene. Upon entering the dark basement, the officers struggled to identify the bodies on the ground, which were severely mutilated and bloodied. However, it soon became clear that it was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they had tragically lost their lives. The area was covered in blood, with splatters on the floor, walls, and even the ceiling, a gruesome scene that defied description. Later, the police conducted a thorough search of the house and discovered a small child in the upstairs children's room. The child was lying in bed surrounded by toys, with visible knife wounds and a deeply cut throat. The scene was gruesome, with blood splattered everywhere. The incident was unprecedented in Medicine Hat, with one officer later stating that it would take decades to erase the memory of what they had seen that day. After searching the house, the police discovered that one family member was missing, Jasmine, the Richardsons' eldest daughter. Since the attack seemed to have happened in the basement and her room, while the rest of the house was untouched and nothing was stolen, officers feared for her safety. The state of the bodies suggested the crime occurred the night before, with the perpetrator breaking in and attacking Jasmine's parents. But what had become of Jasmine, and where was she now? The police developed various theories, hoping that by chance, the girl might be safe somewhere outside the home, or that the perpetrator had kidnapped her and was holding her captive. They also considered the possibility of a ransom demand from relatives in the future. However, as time went by, they found no clear answers. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the Richardson family were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses, and loving parents. They didn't deserve to have anyone wish death upon them. However, officers discovered that their eldest daughter had been causing trouble lately. This new information led to a shift in the tone of media announcements, and the investigation began to focus on locating a person of interest, 17-year-old Jasmine Richardson, who was referred to as JR in accordance with Canadian law, which protects the identities of minors. Jasmine and Jeremy Stank were identified as the wanted couple. Police questioned friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding with them, but this lead was a dead end. However, it revealed that the pair attended a party just hours after the crime, where Jasmine seemed unaffected, drinking and making a disturbing joke about carving up her parents, which the guests laughed off as a dark humor. A comic strip found in Jasmine's school locker further confirmed her involvement in the crime, as it detailed how she would deal with her family members alongside her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were widely circulated, and it was only a matter of time before someone came forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon, a tip arrived, and the couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, about 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Stank were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck and offered no resistance as they were taken to the police station. Jasmine was questioned first. She said she loved Stinka, and he felt the same, but their age and social differences were a problem. She claimed the Richardsons wouldn't have approved of their relationship. Jeremy, she said, killed her parents to be with her. When asked if she was involved, Jasmine denied it, saying she was out when it happened and only learned about it later. She accepted it because she loved Jeremy and ran away with him. Detectives struggled to crack the suspects, so they used a clever tactic. They planted an informant in Jeremy's cell who got him to spill details contradicting Jasmine's alibi. Jeremy confessed the murder plot was Jasmine's idea, and he only agreed after they took away her computer. He revealed he killed Deborah and Mark, while Jasmine killed her brother, and even begged him to kill Tyler too. After confessing, Miss Richardson was confronted with the recording and admitted to stabbing her brother out of mercy. She conceived the plan, confirmed by thousands of messages. Jasmine supported Jeremy's dark tastes, feeling alienated from society. Fearing loss, he helped realize the idea. He desired violent revenge, inspired by natural-born killers. With sufficient evidence, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives constructed a clear picture of the crime by piecing together the confessions of the accused, witness testimony, and other case evidence. Prior to the crime, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and led him to the basement, where he attacked her mother, Deborah. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body, with the deepest wound piercing her chest and reaching 12 centimeters deep, ultimately striking her heart. Enraged, Jeremy continued his brutal assault on Mark, inflicting 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson, Jasmine's younger brother, was the last to die. While Jeremy was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on Tyler upstairs. After Jeremy finished with the parents, he went upstairs to assist his girlfriend with the child, callously slashing Tyler's throat as if carving a pumpkin. After washing off the blood at home, Jeremy met Jasmine at a predetermined restaurant where they discussed the night's events. From there, they attended a party. Casey Lancaster, a friend of Jeremy's, helped them eliminate evidence and escape to Saskatchewan. The atrocities they committed are almost indescribable. The couple embarked on their killing spree with an unnerving sense of calm, as if driven by some supernatural force. It's astonishing that, during interrogations and their time in custody, they showed no signs of remorse or regret for their actions. While in detention, they exchanged letters, referring to themselves as legends and immortals. In one letter, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine, who happily accepted. However, their crazed love suddenly began to deteriorate, much like last year's snow. During the trial, they abruptly shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson became the first of the two to face trial. She entered a not guilty plea, arguing that she was in a trance-like state, unable to intervene while Jeremy killed her family members. Additionally, she claimed that she only inflicted injuries on her younger brother, and it was Jeremy who dealt the fatal blow. Jasmine maintained that her discussions with Jeremy about killing her parents were purely theoretical, but they resonated with him so strongly that he coerced her into turning them into reality. Despite being convicted of 3 counts of homicide, Jasmine Richardson received a 10-year prison sentence, thanks to Canada's juvenile criminal justice law, which stipulates that individuals under 14 cannot be imprisoned for more than 10 years. The sentence prioritized rehabilitating and restoring Jasmine's mental state over punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial began. He claimed that he never initially intended to kill his girlfriend's parents. However, when discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. Jeremy alleged that he did not harm Tyler, implying that Jasmine was responsible, while he merely observed from the doorway. The defense claimed that Jasmine had deliberately seduced Jeremy, hoping he would rescue her from her parents' strict control. Friends testified that Jeremy had confided in them about his plan, saying he was desperate to keep Jasmine and would do anything to prevent losing her. The lawyers also requested that the charges be downgraded to manslaughter, arguing that Jeremy was under the influence of drugs at the time of the incident. During questioning by the prosecution, Jeremy's inconsistencies were exposed when he was asked why he had committed the crime. He responded, "When you find your soulmate, you'll do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, Jeremy remained unemotional, but he broke down in tears when his mother, Jacqueline May, took the stand in his defense. She acknowledged feeling guilty about her role in his upbringing, which had been marked by physical abuse, beatings, and rejection by her partners. Jeremy was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and received 3 life sentences. He will not be eligible for parole until at least 25 years later, in 2033. The charge of being an accessory to the crime against Casey Lancaster was dropped in a Medicine Hat court. Casey Lancaster was found guilty of obstructing justice, sentenced to 1 year of house arrest, and ordered to abstain from drugs and alcohol. Jeremy Stank renamed himself Jackson May while in custody. Jasmine Richardson received a 10-year sentence, including 4 years in a psychiatric facility, where she was diagnosed with conduct and oppositional defiant disorders. Later, under community supervision, she showed genuine remorse. Released in 2016, Richardson now lives in Canada under an assumed name, sparking debate about her second chance. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ellie Costile. Alexandria Costile, known as Ellie, was born on September 11, 1997 in St. Louis. As a blonde-haired girl, she grew up with the care and love of her parents, Cindy and Keith, who supported her endeavors. Ellie excelled academically and in sports like track and field and golf. Her dream was to attend the University of Mississippi, and she became a student there, living in a dormitory in Oxford and being popular among her peers. Friends and relatives described her as a lively and energetic person. Summer on campus is quiet, with few students remaining. Those who stay attend extra lectures or prepare for next year, then unwind at local bars and nightclubs in the evening. Ellie Costile, an upperclassman, stayed to improve her knowledge, and having just passed a key exam, was planning to celebrate with friends. A popular spot among young people in Oxford Square is a small bar that serves pizza and drinks. Its lively atmosphere, complete with dim lighting, loud music, and a colorful selection of drinks, makes it a place where the bartenders know many customers by name. On the evening of July 19th, Ellie met up with friends at this bar, where they chatted and had a good time. Despite her efforts to have fun, Ellie seemed tense and spent most of the evening texting someone on her phone. After having a couple of cocktails, she discreetly left the bar. This would be one of the last times Ellie Costile, a University of Mississippi student, was seen in public. On July 20th, 2019, around 10:30 a.m., police officers stumbled upon a young woman's body near an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, about 30 miles from the university, during their routine patrol. The victim had been shot 9 times in the back, and investigators found 11 shell casings at the scene. A purse containing a driver's license and a student ID belonging to 21-year-old Alexandria Costile, a University of Mississippi student, was found nearby on the roadside. Ellie's death shocked the University of Mississippi community. Her father confirmed the news on Facebook, saying police told them Saturday that she'd been a crime victim. Witness interviews established that a few days before the incident, Ellie's parents had visited her from St. Louis, during which she expressed her enthusiasm for the upcoming academic year at the university, with no reservations about staying on campus for the summer. Moreover, data from her Apple Watch revealed that following a phone conversation with her mother, Ellie sent several messages to Brandon. An examination of these messages revealed that 3 months prior to the incident, Ellie had confided in Brandon about some shocking news. Since Brandon was the last known person to have communicated with the victim, he became a person of interest to the police. A closer look at their messages further disclosed that Ellie and Brandon had been in an on-again, off-again romantic relationship. Brandon Theld, a tall, dark-haired young man with an athletic build, was also a student at the University of Mississippi, hailing from Fort Worth, Texas, and raised in a well-mannered family. In 2016, when Ellie met Brandon as a freshman, she fell for him immediately. The young couple started dating, but they never formally declared themselves as an official couple. While Ellie's feelings for Brandon were genuine, he never showed a serious commitment towards her. Ellie's friends knew that her relationship with Brandon was troubled. They frequently argued, even in public. The couple would often break up, only to get back together after a while. On April 12, 2019, Ellie told Brandon that she was pregnant, but he didn't respond. She sent him numerous texts and voice messages, but he ignored her. 3 months later, Brandon finally replied, saying that he didn't want a child because it would ruin his life. He refused to help or support Ellie, telling her to just take a pill or make a doctor's appointment to deal with the situation. Despite being deeply in love, Ellie desperately wanted to talk to Brandon in person, but he kept refusing. On the night of July 19th, Ellie went to a local bar with her friends at 11:52 p.m. Surveillance cameras showed her leaving the bar and taking a taxi home. About 30 minutes later, Brandon called her at 1:58 a.m. on July 20th. Ellie got into a vehicle, unaware that it would be her last ride. She headed to an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, where Brandon was waiting. The drive to the camp was supposed to take around 45 minutes. Witnesses reported hearing gunshots in that area between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. On Sunday afternoon, investigators contacted Brandon Theld, requesting him to visit the police station to discuss Ellie Castillo. Initially, he made excuses to avoid the meeting, but eventually promised to appear on Monday at 8:30 a.m. However, when Brandon failed to show up at the police station on Monday, July 22, 2019, investigators began tracking his phone's location. The data revealed that he was heading back to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. As a result, authorities issued an alert for his pickup truck. 2 days later, Brandon was finally arrested when he stopped at a gas station in Memphis. Brandon Theld, a 22-year-old, was arrested and charged with homicide in the local area. Despite this, his lawyer and father insisted that he was innocent. As the Oxford community tried to make sense of the violent death of one of their own, the death of Ellie Castillo quickly drew national attention. Reporters from all over the country came to Oxford, eager to learn more about Ellie and the person accused of killing her. Brandon Theld maintained his innocence until the end, but the evidence was against him. A gun matching the shooting was found in his possession, along with bloody clothing. He had gone to Texas to get his father's gun, suggesting premeditation. His internet history showed searches for abortion services and ways to avoid punishment for a crime. A letter to his parents revealed his dark thoughts and feelings, where he mentioned that something in him just didn't work, and that he thought it was the end for him. Investigator Jared Bundren shared some previously known details about the shocking crime with the public. He revealed that Ellie had told Brandon she suspected she was pregnant, but Brandon didn't want her to have the baby. This led to numerous arguments between the couple, with Ellie wanting to meet in person to discuss the situation. Brandon refused to meet until the day of the incident. The police wanted to question Brandon and asked him to come to the station for questioning. However, Brandon resisted and made excuses for not being able to come in. Concerned, the police began tracking his cell phone and located him. They found that Brandon was heading to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Authorities alerted nearby police departments, and Brandon was arrested when he stopped to refuel at a gas station in Memphis. Upon his arrest, the police found blood on him and a pistol in his truck that matched the weapon used in Ellie's murder. Despite Brandon's claims of innocence, the police charged him with the crime. Morgan acted quickly after hearing about the student's death, seeking guidance from administrators. She noted the university's past experiences with student suicides and accidents, but this was a new situation. Morgan briefly addressed Ellie's passing in class, alerted counselors, and allowed students to postpone exams if needed. She expressed sympathy, saying her heart went out to Ellie's parents and friends, stressing that parents shouldn't have to bury their children. As it turned out, Ellie Cotile, in her need for support, had told friends that she was pregnant with Brandon Thell's child. Her sisters knew she was pregnant and that she had told Brandon. A classmate said that he was very upset about it, worrying about how it would ruin his life and future. He was angry that she wouldn't have an abortion, but she said she didn't believe in that. Ellie tried to end her 17-week pregnancy using harmful methods like excessive drinking and substance use. Brandon knew but was seeing someone else. He wanted her to abortion, but she morally opposed it. He was abusive, frequently breaking up with her in anger, then returning apologetic and she'd take him back. Ellie Cotile's shocked friends and classmates struggled to cope with the news and paid tribute to their friend on social media. Her friend Anna Pasco mentioned that it was just hard for her because when she saw Ellie's face, all she could think about was what Ellie went through, what she thought, and what she said. Anna added that it was very, very difficult. On Thursday evening in her hometown of St. Louis, a memorial service was held for Ellie Cotile at the request of the community. However, no public statements were made in Oxford about memorial events. Only black ribbons encircling the majestic white column of the women's houses, including Alpha where Ellie lived, served as a reminder of the tragedy. The young student's demise unsettled the entire state. Despite withholding key facts for investigative purposes, several news agencies conducted in-depth investigations and uncovered surveillance footage of Ellie Cotile near the location where her body was discovered early Saturday morning. The footage, captured on cameras, shows Cotile with a man at a 24-hour store in the Harmontown area. A store's owner revealed that police visited his store on Sunday to review the surveillance footage. However, he claimed that the investigators didn't explain the reason for their visit and took some evidence with them when they left. According to him, the video footage is erased every 72 hours, making it impossible to retrieve the captured footage. The business owner expressed his shock, saying, "We've never had any problems or violent incidents here. This is a small town, it's quiet, everyone knows each other. This is just madness." Lafayette County Sheriff's Office keeps investigation details quiet to ensure the perpetrator is brought to justice, says Coroner Rocky Kennedy, who explains that revealing too much now could jeopardize the case. Kennedy shrugged off intense media scrutiny, saying every case is equally important and gets the same level of attention. Michelle Miller stressed the need to recognize relationship warning signs after Ellie's death, questioning if it could have been prevented. Brandon Theld was charged and sentenced to life, with parole possible at 65, now serving at the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Brandon Theld showed remorse at his trial, apologizing to Ellie Cotile's family and his own for her death. A key piece of evidence was that Ellie was never pregnant, leaving us to wonder why she fabricated it. She seemed to believe the lie, hoping it would win Brandon's heart. Tragically, her loved ones still grieve. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sean Eckerd. Donna and Samuel Eckerd, who came from a long line of family relationships, tied the knot. Between them, they had 6 grown children from previous marriages. After facing numerous challenges in their early marriages, they found comfort and solace in each other. The couple decided to settle down in San Diego, California. They rented a spacious family home and never missed attending church services on weekends. A few years after their move, Donna gave birth to a son named Stanley, and 2 years later, Sean was born. Donna dedicated her life to raising her sons and taking care of the home. As a result, Stanley and Sean grew up in a loving and nurturing environment. They both attended a reputable local school, and every weekend, the entire family would participate in church activities without fail. The Eckerd family was a tight-knit one, with the adult children regularly keeping in touch and gathering together for family holidays, despite being scattered across the continent. Sean was a sociable and lively individual, boasting a charismatic personality that effortlessly drew people to him. He was an attentive listener and had a talent for empathy, making it easy for him to form friendships. In contrast, Stanley was more introverted and cautious around new people and experiences, which made socializing a bit more challenging for him. Despite their differing personalities and age gap, the brothers shared a common circle of friends and classmates. Unwaveringly loyal, they looked out for each other, often acting as one unit. As they grew up, they developed into well-mannered and academically successful young men. Their bond was built on trust and mutual respect, with their parents valuing respect above all else. Good-natured teasing between the brothers was commonplace, but always done in a light-hearted and humorous spirit. Donna and Samuel raised their children, instilling in them faith in God and guiding them according to God's laws. As the Eckerd brothers grew up, their lives unfolded naturally. However, their interests gradually diverged, becoming starkly different. Sean, the youngest, developed a passion for music and played in a band, while Stanley, the eldest, became fascinated with martial arts. Each brother's life was filled with vivid experiences and emotions, which they would share with the family in the evenings. Every evening, when the family gathered before dinner, Sean's stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans would dominate the conversation. The family would listen intently to Sean, leaving little time for Stanley to share his own experiences. Stanley felt that he didn't have grand plans or exciting stories to share, let alone friends to brag about. As a result, he humbly listened to his brother's stories, never getting the chance to share his own. On one memorable evening, Sean shared with his family that he had met a neighbor, Mary Jane, a delicate young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair. He was captivated by her and had been drawn to her house by the enchanting piano melodies drifting from her open window. Entranced, he walked into her home without knocking, but his self-assurance and charm helped him to extricate himself from the awkward situation and make a good impression on the girl he was interested in. Although Mary Jane was a few years older than Sean, they were able to maintain a friendly relationship. Sean, being the social butterfly, would often organize picnics, inviting Mary Jane to join in. They spent their time strolling, visiting parks, and taking in the views from observation decks. However, their blossoming adolescent romance was cut short by the harsh realities of the adult world. The Eckerd family received devastating news about the illness of Donna's elderly mother, Sean and Stanley's great-grandmother. In pursuit of a better life, Sean's parents tried to consider the interests of each family member, but their decision ultimately changed the course of their lives. Sean was reluctant to leave his hometown, his friends, and Mary Jane, but the decision had already been made. The Eckards left the city where their children had grown up and moved to a new state. In 2005, they settled in Donna's mother's house in Spring Hill, Florida, starting a fresh chapter. For the whole family, this move felt like a breath of fresh air, as it proved to be the right decision. Sean and Stanley's grandmother was recovering well. Initially, the move was tough on Sean, who missed his band, strolls with Mary Jane, and hangouts in his favorite city. However, Sean's optimistic nature soon took over, and he began to build a new life as vibrant as the one he had left behind. Donna and Samuel found jobs at the Presbyterian Church, where they spent most of their time. Donna looked after the children in the nursery, while Samuel assisted with the chapel. Over time, the brothers reconciled and made new friends together. At their new school, they revived their old life. Sean rejoined the school band, while Stanley attended a martial arts school near their home. Despite their busy schedules, Sean remained obsessed with Mary Jane. Every night, he'd lock himself in his room and talk to her on the phone for hours. Their goodbyes always ended the same way, with Sean promising to visit her once he got his parents' permission. While Sean held on to his first love, the more reserved and modest Stanley struggled to find his place within the family. In an attempt to assert himself, Stanley made a series of poor decisions that would ultimately have devastating consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, Stanley told his parents he was quitting school to focus on martial arts and start a club. However, his extreme enthusiasm led him to associate with the wrong crowd, and he began committing petty fraud and trying illegal drugs. In 2007, his questionable connections landed him in trouble with the law, and he was arrested for stealing and charged with felony fraud. The news of Stanley's misbehavior hit his mother, Donna, hard. She had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital, but a lawyer hired by her sister-in-law helped resolve the situation. The lawyer successfully defended Stanley, highlighting the lack of concrete evidence, which led to a suspended sentence. This experience terrified Stanley, leaving him feeling guilty and withdrawn as he hoped to be understood and accepted by his family. After what happened to Stanley, Sean kept his plans private during the summer vacation. He worked as a waiter, saving money, and left a note for his mom saying he was heading to California to see Mary Jane. The 2-day bus ride seemed endless, with the scenery and time of day changing outside his window. He imagined seeing Mary Jane at the final stop, his heart full of anticipation. The bus pulled up to the final stop, and Sean couldn't wait to see Mary. Through the window, he'd caught a glimpse of her bright smile and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears. They shared a special connection, having spent some of the happiest days of their lives together, often reminiscing about their carefree high school days. It was during one of their strolls that Sean first confessed his love to Mary, and to his delight, she felt the same way. As they sat on a bench, Sean suddenly felt dizzy, his vision turned dark, and he lost consciousness. Sean was rushed to the hospital, where his condition rapidly deteriorated. Mary Jane quickly contacted Sean's sister, Jennifer, who flew from Florida to California to be by his side. The doctors diagnosed Sean with a tick-borne illness that can cause severe complications, including brain inflammation, in a matter of days. A long and arduous battle for Sean's life and health ensued. After over a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation, the doctors finally managed to revive Sean. The road to recovery was tough, and the tick bite he'd suffered during their summer walk had turned out to be a serious injury. Jennifer took Sean back to Florida, where he began a long and difficult therapy. Mary Jane was left to wait anxiously, with phone calls being their only means of communication. The Eckhart family came together in the face of a series of troubles and unexpected illnesses. Donna went to great lengths to help her son Sean recover from a serious illness, carefully monitoring his diet and exercise to ensure he made a full recovery. Meanwhile, Stanley harbored feelings of resentment and jealousy towards his brother, which only grew as time passed. After his recovery, Sean regained his strength and resumed his studies in music. In 2009, he completed his studies and began making plans to return to Mary Jane, the girl he loved, and introduce her to his parents. However, his plans were not meant to be. Stanley introduced Sean to his dream girl, Samantha, a native of Florida, who quickly clicked with the two brothers. Samantha was charmed by Sean's cheerful and sociable nature, but Stanley was smitten with her and actively courted her. They went on several romantic dates, culminating in a passionate kiss. Stanley was over the moon, but Samantha had still been thinking about Sean. She sent him a message confessing her feelings and inviting him on a city walk. Sean agreed, and they spent the evening strolling along the waterfront, talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. However, Sean didn't try to win Samantha over, as he had already given his heart to someone else. Samantha, feeling down, sent a message to Stanley revealing that Sean had been seeing her behind his back and confessed his strong feelings for her. That same evening, Stanley was enraged. He stormed into his brother's room and they had a heated conversation. Initially, they spoke in hushed tones, but their words soon turned into loud shouts, followed by an eerie silence. Although their parents were home, they were accustomed to the brothers' loud arguments, so they didn't think much of it. It was Mom who first realized Sean was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the argument from the previous evening, she got Stanley's explanation that Sean had left home after their fight. 2 days into the search, the police received a chilling call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call only heard a woman's scream and a loud, piercing male moan in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally managed to record Jennifer's desperate plea for help. Jennifer continued to scream, begging for assistance and reporting that Stanley had killed Sean. She said Stanley was in the house, talking to their mom, while their dad was in shock over his dead son, who had been buried in the backyard since early Saturday morning. The police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy were met with a horrifying sight in the backyard of the house. Samuel was on his knees, his hands covered in dirt, as he frantically pulled his son's body out of the ground, screaming and desperately trying to clean the dirt off Sean's body. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood with well-manicured lawns, where the two young brothers would often wave to their neighbors, was transformed into a scene of violent tragedy. The once happy family, who had raised 2 sons, was now left with the traumatic memory of digging in the ground only to find one son's lifeless body and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckerd was arrested on suspicion of premeditated murder. During his initial interrogation, he claimed that he had not intended to kill his brother. According to Stanley, he struck Sean on the head in a fit of anger, causing the fatal injury. After realizing Sean was dead, Stanley tied up the body and secretly buried it in the backyard to avoid disturbing his mother. Stanley's statement at the inquest seemed callous and calculating, contrary to his claim of being a loving brother. He said, "I buried him after all, that's what you do with dead people." In his defense, Stanley maintained that he covered up the incident to spare his mother the shock of learning about her son's death. He planned to rebury the body once his parents were no longer around. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation was inconsistent. At times, he broke down in tears, confessed to the crime, and expressed remorse, portraying the incident as an accident. However, he also displayed hatred towards Sean, speaking harshly and bitterly about his brother, whom he blamed for his troubles and for winning their mother's and Samantha's affections. On the same day, Stanley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, with no chance of bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean's body and presented her findings to the court. Her forensic examination revealed that Sean had bruising on his neck, both under the skin and in the form of rope marks, indicating that his neck had been constricted to make breathing difficult. The autopsy concluded that Sean's death was caused by a head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magot carefully reviewed the case. The first hearing took place on February 25, 2011, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd, sat in the second row, weeping as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom in handcuffs. On April 9, 2013, the trial of Stanley Eckerd began in Hernando Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Taddy. The defense team, led by attorney Alan Hunter, faced prosecutor Pete in the prosecution. The prosecution's main objective was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime, whereas the defense argued that the tragedy resulted from a spontaneous fight. In his closing statement, Alan Hunter appealed to the jury to consider Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime, allegedly driven by good intentions. Stanley Eckard was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, which carried a mandatory life sentence if convicted. The verdict would determine his fate, with sentencing scheduled for May 13th. Alternatively, if convicted of second-degree murder, Stanley faced up to life in prison. Throughout the trial, Stanley maintained that he never intended to kill his brother 3 years prior, before burying him in the front yard of their house. Prior to the trial, Eckard had rejected a plea deal from prosecutors, which offered to limit his prison sentence to 20 years in exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. As the clerk read the verdict, Stanley remained stone-faced, his fate now in the hands of District Judge Anthony Taddy, who had presided over the 5-day trial. Samuel and Donna, the parents of the accused, wept quietly as the jury left the courtroom. Samuel's sobs soon turned to screams as numerous relatives gathered around him and his wife, Donna. The jury had found Eckard guilty of second-degree murder, but didn't completely absolve him of guilt, as they believed that he didn't plan to kill 19-year-old Sean. The jury, consisting of 9 women and 3 men, reached this verdict after deliberating for approximately 2.5 hours. The Eckard family maintained that they believed Stanley's account of the events that unfolded in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010. They also criticized the state attorney's office for filing charges against Eckard. Later that day, Samuel Eckard praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for doing an excellent job. The family, however, questioned the appropriateness of the sentence and subsequently filed an appeal to overturn the verdict, which was denied. Samuel Eckard expressed his surprise at the jury's verdict, stating that he couldn't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours. He added that despite that, their faith was not shaken. One undisputed fact that emerged during the trial was that after his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Sean's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. It was Samuel Eckard who discovered Sean's body 2 days later. Pete Mago showed the jury photos of Sean's body in a hole, highlighting the gruesome reality. He emphasized Stanley's inconsistent testimony, changing his story 6 times when questioned about his brother's death. Mago revealed Stanley sent fake messages from Sean's phone, pretending he was alive. After hours of questioning, Stanley finally admitted to killing Sean during a struggle, claiming he hid the body to protect their mother. Mago argued Stanley's manual infliction of injuries constitutes murder, citing testimony and statements about escalating tensions with Samantha Rowe. Stanley discussed revenge with his brother and friend, mentioning a method of killing, but this evidence was tenuous. Alan Lanter argued a crime requires intent, denied killing his brother, and cited the pathologist's testimony that Sean's death was likely caused by a combination of factors, including a head injury possibly sustained from a fall. Lanter reminded the jury of Donna Eckard's testimony about Sean's severe mood swings after his illness diagnosis. She also said his death was an accident. Lanter urged jurors to focus on the circumstances leading to Sean's death, not the disturbing photos or Stanley's decision to bury him. Stanley Eckard is not a murderer, Lanter said. The Eero parents were devastated, having lost 2 sons in one day. The brutal murder of an innocent brother is beyond comprehension. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the 3 younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids: Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned, driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Kara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Kara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Kara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Couch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Kara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Kara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Kara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Kara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Kara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Kara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Kara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, the Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Kara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005 after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor, who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street in Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy, and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags and ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all three charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with two other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to three other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord, who stayed on November 16th. She drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ilana Frick. Ilana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in Windsor, Ontario, to George and Anna, who had immigrated to Canada from Croatia in the early 1970s. She was the younger of 2 daughters, with an older sister named Caroline, with whom she was extremely close. Ilana's birth was considered a miracle by her parents. Her mother, Anna, had faced serious health complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had told them that Anna would likely never conceive again. Anna and George made a significant effort to ensure their daughter's well-being and meet their needs, in spite of the difficulties they faced. They both worked at a car factory, striving to give Ilana and Caroline a good education and a comfortable life. Growing up, Ilana was a diligent and passionate student. She spent most of her free time reading, also found time to attend dance classes, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field events. During her summer breaks, Ilana chose to work to help support her family, often working in cornfields and learning to manage her finances wisely. As she progressed through school, Ilana excelled in math and science, and by the time she reached high school, she had set her sights on a career in medicine. Elena graduated at the top of her high school class and was accepted into a prestigious medical university. Around the same time, she started dating Matthew Ryan, a classmate from high school who was also studying in the same department. They maintained a long-distance relationship after graduation, with Elena moving to Ottawa to pursue a residency program at the university. Matthew, on the other hand, chose to work at a local hospital and did not pursue further education. Despite the distance, Elena and Matthew's relationship continued until nearly 2002. They had even made plans to get married, but ultimately decided to remain friends. By then, Elena was interning at a top clinic and was working towards earning a doctorate, while Matthew's career had not advanced. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Elena met Mohammed Shamji, a new colleague. She was immediately drawn to him. Mohammed, who was just a year older than Elena, was a resident in the neurosurgery department and came from a family of prominent doctors. Mohammed Shamji was born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario, into a family of medical professionals. His father, Farid Shamji, was a well-known surgeon, and his mother, Edith, was a talented psychiatrist. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, also pursued a career in medicine, becoming a medical biophysicist. Both brothers attended Yale University, and later, Mohammed returned to Canada to earn his doctoral degree from the University of Western Ontario. Additionally, Mohammed had taken an interest in a blonde woman, but at first, he did not make any attempts to approach her. Ilana was immediately drawn to Mohammed, a tall, dark-skinned man, and sought to capture his attention. He eventually asked for her number and initiated contact, marking the beginning of their romance. Initially, Ilana perceived Mohammed as a reserved individual who hesitated on dates, jumped between topics, or fell silent, giving the impression of being introverted. However, it was later discovered that his behavior was not due to shyness but rather a lack of interest. Unbeknownst to Ilana, Mohammed was seeing another woman at the time and intentionally kept this a secret. When Ilana discovered she had a rival, she became resolute in her determination to be the only woman in his life. The first year of their relationship was tumultuous, with they breaking up on 3 separate occasions, rekindling. This was largely due to Ilana's persistence in pursuing the relationship. Despite her parents' awareness of the issues and their encouragement to leave Mohammed, Ilana remained resolute, convinced that she had found her soulmate. Ilana often showered Mohammed with gifts, surprises, and home-cooked meals, but he only sporadically reciprocated her affection. Mohammed seemed content to accept Ilana's displays of love without feeling obligated to return them. This dynamic created an emotional imbalance, where Ilana grew increasingly dependent on Mohammed. In the summer of 2004, Ilana and Mohammed received unexpected news: Ilana unplanned pregnancy. A sudden life-changing event forced them to rethink their future plans. While both were anxious about the news, Mohammed felt a strong obligation to marry Ilana before the baby was born, as is traditional in his conservative Muslim upbringing. In September 2004, they had a 2-part wedding. The first ceremony adhered to Mohammed's family's cultural customs, while the second was a more casual celebration with friends at a popular restaurant. At the time, the newlyweds seemed happy and in love. However, their happiness was short-lived. When their daughter, Yasmin, was born in January 2005, their marital problems became apparent. Muhammad's focus on his career and education left Alana and their newborn daughter feeling neglected. To make matters worse, Muhammad had been hoping for a son and wasn't afraid to express his disappointment. This marked the beginning of a troubled marriage that would ultimately end in tragedy. After having her child, Alana took maternity leave to care for her daughter and manage the household. When Muhammad returned home, he would often go straight to his room and spend very little time with his wife and children, which left Alana feeling abandoned and unappreciated. As time passed, Muhammad's behavior worsened, and he became increasingly critical and abusive. He would insult Alana's appearance, refuse to eat her cooking, berating and insulting his wife. Despite her growing unhappiness, Alana chose not to confide in anyone, including her close friends and parents, about her marital problems. However, one day, while Alana was on the phone with her mother, Muhammad returned home in a bad mood and began berating Alana in front of her mother. Alana's mother tried to defend her, but Muhammad shifted the blame onto Alana, claiming she was responsible for their troubled marriage. Alana's mother advised her to end the relationship with Muhammad and file for divorce, but Alana declined, hoping that she could still salvage the marriage. Unfortunately, Muhammad's actions worsened, and he started physically harming Alana on top of the verbal abuse she had already been enduring. The situation reached a boiling point in the summer of 2005 when Muhammad punched Alana in the face, breaking her nose. Fearing for her safety and that of her child, Alana fled to friends and reported the incident to the police, finally deciding to end the marriage and leave Muhammad for good. Muhammad surprisingly begged his wife, Alana, to come back, vowing to never physically abuse her again or even raise his voice. He promised that their family life would be perfect, and he would control his temper. However, Muhammad's sudden change of heart was motivated by self-interest. As a young neurosurgeon, he was about to start at Duke University, working towards his doctorate, and a criminal conviction would ruin his promising medical career. Muhammad's primary concern was his own future, but he successfully convinced Alana to drop the charges against him. She even agreed to follow him to North Carolina, where he would pursue his studies. Alana's loved ones were confused when she didn't leave her husband despite the difficulties she was facing. Instead, she moved to another country with Muhammad. When they encouraged her to reconsider, she stood her ground. When the family settled in the US, life appeared more tranquil for a time. Muhammad earned a highly competitive spot in an elite engineering program. Meanwhile, Alana joined Duke University on a full tuition scholarship. Their relationship grew stronger and became more confident in their decision to have more children. After the arrival of their daughter Fiza, they welcomed another child. Unlike their son's relatively smooth birth, Fiza's delivery was more challenging. The new addition to the family brought immense joy, and they felt grateful for their family growing closer. What secrets lay hidden behind the perfect facade of this family? In the late summer of 2009, Alana and her husband, along with their children, returned to Ottawa, Canada, and settled back into their home. Alana, however, soon ended her maternity leave and secured a job as a family doctor at a renowned hospital, quickly building a solid reputation. Her husband, meanwhile, juggled work, studies, and teaching at a university. As social media gained popularity in the late 2000s, they started a personal blog that portrayed them as an ideal family. They shared photos of their vacations, accomplishments in science, and luxury lifestyle, complete with a lavish home. They even posted about attending prestigious conferences and trendy resorts. To outsiders, they seemed like a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems. However, this perfect image hid a dark reality. Behind closed doors, Muhammad continued to exert strict control over Ilana. He monitored her interactions, dictated what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods, leaving Ilana feeling silent and trapped. As time passed, the tension and aggression between them became stressed, with Muhammad frequently yelling at Ilana and blaming her for their arguments and discord. In 2011, a prestigious medical center in Calgary offered a talented neurosurgeon, Muhammad, a fellowship in spinal surgery. Muhammad accepted the offer and relocated to Calgary, but he had to leave his family in Ottawa because his wife, Ilana, couldn't take a leave of absence from her job for over a year. They had to manage a long-distance relationship. During one of Muhammad's visits home, their relationship faced its biggest challenge yet. While at home, Muhammad accidentally left his laptop open, and Ilana saw a message from another woman on his social media account. The content of the message implied a romantic involvement. When Ilana confronted Muhammad, he confessed to having an affair, which was a devastating blow to Ilana. Ilana's family believed that this was the final straw, and they were convinced that she wouldn't forgive Muhammad again. However, Ilana decided to give their marriage another chance. Muhammad promised to end the affair, and they decided to start fresh in Toronto, where Muhammad had secured a high-paying job. Despite this fresh start, their marital issues persisted. After their move to Toronto, Muhammad expressed his desire to have a son, and Ilana agreed to try again, hoping that a new child would bring stability to their family. In October 2013, they had a son named Marius, a long-awaited addition to their family. Despite the new baby, his behavior towards his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, he devoted himself to his medical career, becoming a skilled and respected neurosurgeon known for his ability to tackle complex cases that other doctors avoided. Meanwhile, the wife also advanced in her career, becoming a representative for the Ontario Medical Association. However, the tension between them began to escalate, and his behavior towards his wife became increasingly aggressive. He went beyond verbal abuse, resorting to physical violence against her. During a family ski trip, the wife suffered a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, as well as other injuries. She initially claimed that the injuries were a result of a skiing accident. However, she later confided in her best friend that the injuries were actually inflicted by her husband. Following another heated argument over his latest infidelity, Ilana discovered that her husband, Muhammad, was having an affair with a colleague. After overhearing a suspicious phone conversation, Ilana confronted him, which led to a violent outburst, and he physically abused her. A friend, who was aware of the situation, advised Ilana to end her marriage, but she refused. Her friend jokingly suggested that Ilana should retaliate by having an affair of her own. Although the suggestion was made in jest, Ilana might have considered it a viable option to get back at her unfaithful husband. During the summer of 2016, their relationship continued to deteriorate. Their children were away at camp or staying with their grandparents, leaving Ilana and Muhammad to face their marital problems alone. In a surprising turn of events, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary in early September, even sharing the news on social media. However, their happiness was short-lived, as they began discussing divorce just a week later. Despite his marital transgressions, Muhammad refused to acknowledge his actions as grounds for divorce, claiming that he was happy with his current situation. On the other hand, a desperate Ilana initiated an affair with a coworker who had been flirting with her, escalating their relationship turmoil. Elena found herself swept up in a new romance, feeling cherished and adored by her partner. This was a welcome change from her current situation, and she reveled in the long-absent sensation of being loved and desired. However, her personal life was about to take a dramatic turn. A fierce argument erupted in the family on November 25, 2016. Elena informed her husband that their divorce was unavoidable. The following day, she consulted with a divorce attorney and then departed for a 3-day medical conference in another city. While Elena was away, her husband, Muhammad, sent her a series of messages, begging her to reconsider and work on saving their marriage for the sake of their children. Elena returned home on November 30th and made a final phone call to her parents. Although her voice betrayed some anxiety, she reassured them that everything was okay. Unbeknownst to her family, Elena had attempted to call the police that evening, but in her distress, she accidentally misdialed the number, leading to a devastating outcome. On December 1st, Anna tried to contact her daughter Ilana but was unable to reach her. Concerned, Anna called her son-in-law Muhammad to ask what was wrong. Muhammad claimed that Ilana had packed her bags in the middle of the night and left him and their children to be with her lover. However, Anna and her husband were skeptical of Muhammad's story, knowing that their daughter would never abandon her children. They asked a close friend of Ilana's to keep an eye on the Muhammad home while they traveled to Toronto to report Ilana's disappearance to the police. The friend reported that Ilana's car was still parked in the driveway, which only added to the family's concern. When Anna and her husband arrived at their daughter's house, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at first. However, Muhammad was agitated and insisted that Ilana was with her lover, repeating the same story he had told the police earlier. After Ilana was reported missing, a shocking discovery was made. The police found a body inside a suitcase. A man walking his dog by the river on December 2nd noticed a new-looking suitcase under a bridge about 24 miles from the suspect Muhammad's home. His curiosity got the best of him, so he opened the suitcase, discovering the body of a blonde woman. The police were immediately notified, and the body was taken to the medical examiner for identification and analysis. Fortunately, identifying the owner of the suitcase was not difficult because the perpetrator had left the luggage tag attached, which still had her name and travel information from her recent trip. Her parents confirmed the identity as Ilana. An autopsy revealed her cause of death to be mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. Additionally, her body showed signs of abuse with multiple bruises and abrasions. Notably, the victim was found dressed in pajamas with no shoes. Considering the victim's position in clothes, it appears she was placed inside the suitcase immediately after her death. The investigation led to the suspect's arrest later that evening at a coffee shop. Evidence indicated he was planning to leave the country. A lawyer accompanied the suspect during his meeting at the time of arrest. However, law enforcement thwarted the escape. Subsequently, Muhammad, the prime witness turned suspect, was arrested, formally charging him with Ilana's first-degree murder. Muhammad denied any involvement in the incident, but a disturbing detail soon came to light. Their 12-year-old daughter, Yasmin, had unintentionally witnessed her mother's murder. Yasmin reported hearing screams and noise coming from her parents' room, prompting her to rush there. She opened the door slightly and saw her father kneeling behind the bed, while her mother was likely on the floor, out of her sight. Muhammad ordered Yasmin to leave the room immediately, shut the door, and go back to bed. The next morning, he told his daughters that their mother had left. Despite her young age, Yasmin sensed that something terrible had occurred, but she couldn't fathom that her father was responsible for her mother's death. To avoid putting his daughter through the trauma of testifying in court, the accused confessed to the crime. He recounted the events of that fateful evening, stating that he and his wife had argued over her alleged infidelity and desire for a divorce. Muhammad claimed that he didn't intend to harm his wife, but the situation escalated rapidly. The argument turned violent, and when his wife tried to call the police, he knocked the phone out of her hand. She began screaming, and Muhammad struck her multiple times in the face before pinning her to the floor and strangling her with his hands. Muhammad's daughter entered the room, but couldn't see what had happened behind the bed. By the time Muhammad realized his wife was not breathing, it was too late. In a desperate attempt to revive her, he made a fatal mistake, breaking her neck. Panicked, he placed her body in a large suitcase and drove around for hours, unsure of what to do. Eventually, he stopped at a small bridge over a river and threw the suitcase into the water, hoping the current would carry it away. However, the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation, hidden in the darkness. During the trial of the surgeon, a scandal emerged involving his father, Ferd Shanji. The elderly man made derogatory comments about his deceased daughter-in-law, trying to justify his son's actions by claiming she had been unfaithful and provoked him. As a result, his medical license was revoked. Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder in April 2019 and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he may be eligible for parole in 14 years, considering the time he served during the trial. This means he could be released as early as 2030. Additionally, Muhammad was prohibited from contacting his children or his wife's parents and was ordered to pay them a substantial amount of compensation. His medical license was also permanently revoked, preventing him from practicing medicine or teaching again. The children who have lost their parents are now being cared for by Ilana's parents.